you heard about stormwater improvements, and they could be really cool because a lot of these new stormwater innovations and improvements really reduce those the nutrient pollution that we've been talking about all morning. And it is my pleasure to introduce one of our top sponsors, Ferguson Waterworks, Jessica Brusso, to say some words, I guess sponsor words, right? And they have a thing in the back, like a booth, with so many interesting ways in which we can incorporate these solutions into our communities. So as we start to advocate stormwater, I know septic to sewer is an issue, but stormwater is a low-hanging fruit, guys. That's where we can really make a dent quickly.
Thank you, Arvella. I appreciate that. This is amazing. I was here 2 years ago, right after I got hired by Ferguson, basically. I heard about this event from a colleague of mine that was at Brevard County Natural Resources. I had come from the city of Cocoa Beach stormwater. So I was like, I got to get down there because the Indian River Lagoon has been in peril for years. And we've had multiple fish kills and harmful algal blooms. And I love Biscayne Bay. I'm on an outrigger canoe team up in Cocoa Beach, and I get the privilege to come down here and paddle across your beautiful bay and race there. And it's just a special place for me. So when I heard about this event, I'm like, I have to get down there. I just started with Ferguson, but I asked my boss, can I get down there? Because I have to make connections down here. I have to talk to people. I want to help. So that's why I'm here. So again, my name is Jessica Brusso. I am the Green Stormwater Infrastructure Specialist with Ferguson Waterworks. I cover the state of Florida. I know some of you out there, but what's really exciting is I don't know a lot of you, which means that I get to introduce you to the wonderful world of our stormwater solutions that we have. So please, again, take some time, come back to the table afterwards. But just so you do know, we have different solutions, alternative surfaces. We have medias for reducing nutrients, for reducing bacteria. We have inlet protection. We have all kinds of great things for planting trees in urban environments, as well as, if you've heard of them before, nutrient separating baffle boxes or NSBBs. We have an awesome model back there. So during some of the breaks, please come back. We'll run a demo. We'll turn on the model. You can actually see how that works. So please come visit us back there. Come and learn more. And if you'd also like, later this afternoon, around 2 o'clock now, I'll be on a panel and we'll be discussing with Miami-Dade County and Miami Waterkeeper and Everglades Law, discussing how we can implement nature-based solutions and green stormwater infrastructure as solutions to help protect the bay and help restore it. So without further ado, though, I do want to introduce Pamela Sweeney with Miami-Dade County. She's going to be talking to you guys about the plan for reasonable assurance.
Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure and an honor to be with all of you today. I'm very excited to talk a little bit about the effort that maybe the county's leading, but you all are certainly going to be a part of in some way, shape, or form, which is the Reasonable Assurance Plan. I do want to say that today we kind of are planning and strategizing on the backs of greats, scientific and engineering greats and policy greats, like Carlos Hernandez, who we lost last year, Dr. Joan Browder, Pete Harlem, policy greats like Sean McCracken and Harvey Rubin. So I'm bringing their energy today with me to all of you. So with that, I do want to talk a little about what we do at Durham, just in case you're not familiar with the county's Environmental Resources Management division of the county. And this is where your groundwater is protected, therefore your drinking water is protected. We are strategizing on the how to continue to acquire and manage and sort of manage the largest acreage of urban forests in Miami-Dade County. Lies in Durham's hands, and don't underestimate the power of trees as we talk about stormwater and how effective they can be. So this is where, speaking of connections, there's very many pieces of Durham that connect to make things like the RAP and these innovative ideas possible. So with that, I wanted to talk a little bit about why we're here today. And I'd like to just take a moment to open this space with a land acknowledgement. What you see in front of you is a still of a video from Reverend Houston Cypress's What Indoors. You can Google this and find it online. It's a really beautiful piece of art, digital art. And so our proceedings today and the natural resources we will be discussing occur on the traditional and ancestral lands of the Seminole, Miccosukee, and Tequesta people. And this is something that we are thinking about as our team at Durham and as the county at large, what it means to reckon with the meaning of being stewards of the resources that we have greatly impacted, and how to center Indigenous voices and minds as we engage in how to restore and maintain the resilience of these lands. So what I'd like to do today is take you quickly through what a reasonable assurance plan is, but more than anything, what is the need to act? I think we've heard a lot today about just what the urgency and impetus is. We've certainly talked a little about the history of how we got here, but I'm going to take you through a little bit about the logic too on how we got here. We're going to talk a little bit about why a RAP. There are options available to communities like ours, communities across the state. By and large, every county is facing, whether you have a lake, a stream, a lagoon, an estuary, you are facing some sort of critical point where you are facing either catastrophic loss or the potential for catastrophic loss. So why a RAP in the face of what we are facing? And then lastly, what is the impact that the RAP will have? I want to talk a little bit about not only, again, what a RAP is, but how we envision it helping. And we want to talk a little bit about also what it does to sort of integrate with other approaches, not only that the county is undertaking, but also what the state is doing, our municipal partners are doing, how that connects back to businesses and opportunities in the private sector to think about innovative solutions. And of course, we wouldn't be anywhere without our environmental advocates and the education and the discussions that take place in that community. So with that, this is a familiar scene, maybe not by air, but you've heard many folks today, many esteemed colleagues, talk about what Biscayne Bay has faced in the last decade. Almost what are we now? Almost 6 years, 7 years to the day. This photo was taken by our team, John Sidner and others, doing some manatee surveys in North Bay. This is facing southwest, looking at the Julia Tuttle Causeway. And this is, of course, a basin where we've lost over 80% of seagrass at that time. And over the course of several years, speaks volumes, I think, about our tenacity and kind of where we want to end up. But we know that more than anything, the takeaway here is that whatever we were doing isn't working. The checks and the balances in place from a regulatory perspective, how we understood the resources we were monitoring and why, that was really kind of behind us now at this juncture. And of course, just a few years after that, as we've heard today from many folks, came the largest fish kill Biscayne Bay has ever seen. And while we've had our sort of run-in with algal blooms here and there, we've seen some pretty nasty phytoplankton blooms in this time as well. But what I want you to take away from this is that we understood there was a need to act, and we understood that this means for the county and for our partners that we needed to take some decisive action, and we needed to kind of shift our paradigms on how we were doing things. We knew that we were no longer adequately sort of checking and balancing our efforts. I don't want to jump ahead too much, but I will say that sort of forward-looking, we know that between 2018, where we last were looking at a data set, we were at about 5% total seagrass coverage in this very basin, what we call the Julia Tuttle Basin, between 79th Street and the Julia Tuttle Causeway. As of 2023, we do have upwards of 40% total seagrass coverage in this basin, with total green algae, which is what was sort of coming in and taking place of that seagrass initially in 2018 at about 40%. Something came in its place, certainly less valuable, I'll say, from an ecosystem perspective, but important. That calcareous green algae was holding down some of the sediment in this basin. You can even see a sediment plume in this photo that became a really big problem. And, so seagrass loss really begat many other negative cycles. And so we're seeing total calcareous green algae go down to about 20%. Our team, Laura's restoration and enhancement team, is here today to talk to you all if you'd like some more information about those details. But we really wanted this picture to kind of hit home about what that tipping point was. We've talked today about the impacts of development, the impacts of the planning decisions we've made, how it is we would like to see ourselves move forward. But really, I think this moment in time is giving us a new opportunity to think yet again, how do we want to see Miami-Dade function? How do we want this blue heart, as Arella has so affectionately called it, and as our mayor refers to it? How are we going to do that in the face of increasing population, climate change, and demands for water resources? So what I wanted to share about this particular sort of geeky slide isn't just that we understand how water management has changed. We know it has, but how does this connect back to the RAP and what the work is we are doing today? You really also have to take into consideration our geology and the fact that, of course, as you know, we sit on our drinking water 40 feet below our feet when you're inland. And we know that there is very much a hydraulic exchange with our surface water and our groundwater. So when you think about our groundwater is our surface water is our groundwater, our stormwater becomes our groundwater, any groundwater pollution becomes our surface water pollution. It really makes this a very challenging endeavor, more so than even other parts of the state where you're not contending with that same sort of vacuous exchange. And so we know that our work is cut out for us because we have a good understanding of the mechanics of groundwater and surface water resources in Miami-Dade County. And sadly, we know even more now about how this kind of pollution makes its way to the Bay. And I think Dr. Wester did an excellent job, as did others, kind of talking about the nature of the pollution we see, which is a function of the land uses that we have. And this gets to the heart of any restoration plan when it comes to water quality. It's a question of how do you do a better job or the best job you can regulating the impact or what's coming off the land and impacting either groundwater, which would become our surface water, or our surface water directly being impacted. This is not our first time at this, right? We've talked a little bit today about many past efforts. We've got management plans at the state and federal level, at the county level. This was all, of course, kicked off in the mid-70s with not only the efforts at the federal level, but the state and local level. I think you'll hear a little bit later on how our aquatic preserve was started, and I am wearing a vintage 40th anniversary t-shirt of the aquatic preserve's creation. Thanks in large part to a lot of people in this room and some of the people I mentioned a minute ago when I got a little choked up. But I think that these efforts, it's important to note them, right? Yes, we're not where we need to be, but there's definitely a decisive effort in this community and a decisive decision that we're not going to let it stand, and that we're going to continue to learn, and that we're really going to try to do the best job we can with the information that we have. And I think that's the turning point where we're now. One thing I do want to point out, though, on this particular slide is in 2010, 2011, when DEP and EPA approved and proposed and implemented just a few years later, numeric nutrient criteria. And this does tie back to the reasonable assurance plan in just a moment. But the idea here was, for those of you maybe a little less familiar with water resource policy at the state level, was we've always had a narrative set of conditions and criteria for water quality in our estuary. And what this meant was, the language looks something like, well, it's an anti-degradation standard. You can't degrade the water quality beyond which it was at the time that, let's say, the aquatic preserve was designated. Well, what does that mean? Tell me what my phosphorus number is, right? I'm regulating your development. What's the number? What should chlorophyll be? What should total nitrogen be? So this subjectivity led us to, in part, kind of where we are today. But since 2012, when these laws were promulgated and implemented by folks like Durham as part of their 40-year, I think we're at something like a 45-year data set now, this is where those kinds of numbers truly become a part of the solution, because we have data that tells us at what point in time was the Bay supporting healthy seagrass habitat, healthy hard bottom habitat, fish and wildlife. The other thing I wanted to mention up at the top around 2020, where we, again, sort of made that decisive decision from a policy perspective that wasn't necessarily a bunch of scientists like it was with numeric nutrient criteria being set up. That was much more about folks like you in the room rallying and advocating. So in terms of why a wrap, we wanted to just talk for a second about the things that have to come together to make an effective plan to move forward. We're taking technical knowledge and the actions to date. We're taking information that we've gleaned from a science perspective. We're taking opportunities like the momentum you all have created from a policy perspective to implement things like improved and new criteria for septic tanks that go in. We'll call that the OSTDS or septic tank ordinance. Looking at impervious surface area and trying to reduce the amount of impervious surface area we allow folks in Miami-Dade County to have on their property. And when you kind of couple these things together, along with the data that we have, the policy that we have, and the right leadership at the right time, it can't be overexpressed how our mayor made a decisive decision to have Miami-Dade County lead this effort. And that's really important because the 5 wraps that exist across the state, it was very much a joint effort, which meant you had to figure out the funding, you had to figure out who was leading what piece of this. And our mayor was very much on board with the county leading the process and allowing those extra dollars to be used by municipalities who will be regulated by the wrap to get their projects done. And the reason why that decisive leadership is so important and what each of you in this room has brought to the table so far is we're kind of working against time. And the wrap becomes more important when you think about the resilience of Biscayne Bay. Talk a lot about coastal structures and buildings and critical infrastructure and their resilience, and that's important. But without the resilience of Biscayne Bay, our $64 billion economy generating blue heart, then people aren't safe, businesses aren't safe, and we don't have that beautiful water body that we love. And there are things that we can control, and we must control them. And this is again why the wrap and taking a decisive action now is important. Things like nutrient loading, be it pollutants coming from stormwater or wastewater, groundwater, so be it, but pollutant loading is the issue. But there are a lot more things out of our control, right? So we're tipping the scale on things like sea level rise, rising water and air temperatures that lead to things like fish kills and things sort of cycle out of control. And we know that we need to make a decision. And when it comes down to it, the wrap is about looking at the amount of nutrients coming into a system. This is where phosphorus becomes an important factor, how that impacts water clarity and seagrass cover. And Miami-Dade County on its own has evaluated this, right? Many of you are familiar with our report card, and it's important to kind of look at total phosphorus as a key here. There's lots of policy involved here, which we won't spend a lot of time going into, but want you to pay attention to the fact that 7 out of 10 of our water body IDs or WIBIDs are impaired as declared under some of these pieces of legislation. The important take-home message here is that you have options. You can go into a total maximum daily load and a BMAP, which basically is a state process that can take upwards of 10 years. You've still got to go through a lot of technical documentation and understanding where do you get back to where you want to get to. But there are alternatives. When you engage in a wrap, you are allowed through those pieces of legislation you saw a moment ago to not be placed on the Clean Water Act's 303D list. This allows the county to not be placed in this category, which requires we have a TMDL set, a total maximum daily load. It allows us to handle it ourselves. So when you line these things up together, you have the state dictated process of a total maximum daily load after you're determined to be impaired. The state has to prioritize you again, right? Lots of critically impaired waters across the state. Or you can engage in a alternative restoration plan that you engage in, you pay for, you set the timeline, you engage your stakeholders, and it can happen a lot quicker. So the idea is you get to cleaner water faster. And hopefully, Deputy Secretary Blaylock, I did good and right by your staff whose slides that I'm borrowing here. So elements of the wrap, in short, are pretty much the same as they would before TMDL and BMAP. You have to figure out how do you get back to that reference period, that point in time, lots of modeling involved, lots of looking at historical data. This is Carlos Hernandez's face. This is how we kind of settled on how we get there. You want to get back to a place where seagrass coverage was good and healthy, and that's what we're going to be working toward. Also not our first time at a wrap. As Urella and others have mentioned, our mayor mentioned earlier, we really gunned for a funding opportunity. And so we thought of a novel approach to try just a Northern Basin RAP. We went through a lot of effort to try to get that done and take a novel approach that the state said, hey, maybe this will work. Maybe we could do this for other water bodies too, but it's really just too complicated. Our pollution up north is really considerable. So where we are today is starting from scratch in some ways, but really balancing against what we've done before. So we do have a lot of great technical work that's been done, particularly up north, a lot of great stakeholder engagement, but where we are lacking, of course, is looking at the watershed as a whole. And so this is going to be our work. Tying it really quickly, I think this is my last slide, to policy. Dr. Wester set us up really well with that quote about, again, what do we want Miami to be and where are we going to go in the future? And we are going to be working toward a watershed plan that our watershed board will oversee the creation of. And the RAP will kind of come up underneath that. It's one small piece, but a really significant piece of how you think about things like water management practices, land use practices, outreach to the community, and larger plans like climate change and sea level rise. So with that, so much gratitude for your time and love for our Bay. Thank you.